Hello and welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. For those of you who have been here, you know the drill. We do a sound check to make sure that you hear two voices and no more than two. Stefano, do you do?
Hello,
Perfect.
everyone. Hi, Rax. Nice to see you here. Hi, everyone. Yes, please. Can you hear us loud and clear? Let us know.
Yeah, let us know in the chat if you can hear us loud and clear. Perfect. Okay. Thanks for responding on that
Yeah.
one. I
Thank you, Aaron.
I can't believe
Yeah.
that we are already on the final bootcamp series, right? So for those of you who have been with us in the last 2 weeks, welcome back. But for those of you who did not, but made it only to this one, don't worry. We have you covered. We will take care of that. Um, so with that said, let me move on. My name is Raghavan Srinivas. I go by Rags. Basically, I work as a developer advocate at DataStax. And my undergraduate education was, believe it or not, in mechanical engineering. A long time ago. But what I like about these workshops is that this is the closest I can come to see things move. Because it's all about code. It's all about getting your hands dirty. But we made it in such a way that it gets only as dirty as required. Meaning, we install a lot of things for you, make it very easy, but at the same time, we don't hide anything. Okay, so you will see that if you go to your Gitpod version, all that you need is a GitHub account. All the code is there, all the scripts are there, and you can try it out yourself later as well. And that's the nice part about being in data stacks and being as a developer advocate, allowed to teach and communicate. And we get this opportunity to do this Wednesday workshops. And towards the end, we will also talk about kind of an in-person event. And one of the things I'm
Oh,
really
yeah.
passionate about is kind of the inner loop, which leads to a lot of developer productivity. And I'm extremely happy, always ecstatic to be with the great Stefano. So with that said, introduce yourself.
Okay, so I'm Stefano. Nice to see you all. It's cool because it's nice to see a lot of you here today. I'm a developer advocate at DataStax as well. Here you see my coordinates. If you want to connect, I'd be glad. I'm a developer and architect. I love Cassandra, Apache Cassandra, and related distributed database and technologies. I used to be a physicist, a theoretical physicist at that. Since long time, I moved on to IT and distributed system, but I also have, there is quite a bit of, more than a bit of a teacher in me. So that's where I am. So yeah, let's go.
So we have an entire crew. Some of them are on the chat, and they are helping us out, in all ways possible. So the Wednesday workshops wouldn't have happened without the crew, because we kind of get to share this, every now and then, right? And I'm sure you'll see them in the remaining installments or some of the other workshops, but there are no remaining installments because January 11th was we learned about kind of what NoSQL is, and we'll talk about that a little bit today as well. Um, and one of the fundamental things you want to worry about when you're designing your applications, when you're designing your solutions, is kind of coming up with efficient data models. Obviously, we couldn't do justice in the 2.5 hours or whatever it took, but still, this is something that you need to pay attention. And the final part, of course, is building a backend within NoSQL database. And today we are going to go through that. And like I said, it's going to be all hands on. We will, in a moment, do some warm up with Menti, where we will try to find the audience, who you are, what kind of programmer you are, how do you build backends, or how do you build front ends, whether you're a front end developer and all that. We will talk about that. In this in today's hands-on lab or workshop, we are going to focus on maybe two languages. Of course, you have the option of kind of doing, any three of them, like Java, Python, and Node. Okay, JavaScript, right? You can do any of the
Yeah.
three, but we will primarily walk through two, and we'll get to how we pick the second one in a second. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, but I may add one thing, two things actually. First, if you want the difficulty level up, you can try 3 languages at once if you somehow manage to. But more seriously, don't worry, because we will later give you a reference to all instructions, because everything is spelled out on a repository with code and instructions for you to just go by yourself and at your own pace and follow your rhythm.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
so take your own pace. You don't need to hurry through, because you can always go back and kind of look at the instructions. So the agenda for today is basically, again, we're going to do an introduction. We're going to look at microservices and why Apache Cassandra, right? Because it's not enough to have just reactive programs. You need some responsive data to go with it as well. And that's where Cassandra shines, right? It's really about scale, response, and so on. And we'll talk about that. We will take the easy option for microservices with REST APIs, because there are different ways of doing this, right? But as they say, the prerogative of the teacher is to take the simple example and then let you build a more complex example with gRPC and other GraphQL and other APIs. So here we will just touch upon REST APIs, but the philosophy, as you will see, is exactly the same, right? You're going to have different services, and one of the service will expose an API, and that's going to be used by the client or maybe your mobile phone or whatever the case may be. We are going to continue to use the same data model that you saw in week 2. But if you're not familiar with it, don't worry about it. It's a sensor application, and we'll talk about this. There is going to be a very simple sensor REST API. And again, if you didn't attend the previous data modeling workshop, you can go back and look at it as well. But primarily, what's next? Okay, we have a homework. We are not very, how would you call it, very strict graders, right? but we want to make sure that
No,
you have done
not
your
really.
work, because we do offer badges, and we'll talk about that in a second. Anything you want to add, Stefano? Yeah.
That's okay. I think you said it all. Just we offer something that is more than a certificate of attendance, something like that proves that you not only did passively attend, but you did stuff. That's why we up the game with a little homework, which involves coding, and we will grade it and release homework, but that will be
Absolutely.
shown
Okay,
later.
perfect. But again, you've heard me say this before if you've been in the workshop, and I really am kidding you not, is that we are living in the golden age of developers. Despite what's happening in the industry, I think there are so many resources for us to get comfortable with whatever we want. Gone are those days when you had to thumb through manuals to figure out what happened, and there was like no source code to play with. I had to do all of that myself. We have plenty of resources
Oh
from
yeah.
DataStax devs itself, but of course there is so much that the industry also provides. In particular, to name some of the resources that we provide, you are in a live workshop, which thanks again for attending, and trying to kind of enrich your understanding, right? But we also have these workshops recorded on youtube.com. Go to youtube.com/datastacksdevs, and the same instructions are on github.com/datastacksdevs. So just look for datastacksdevs and you should be able to find it. We also make it a little bit of fun, and Menti is going to be coming up shortly. But essentially, we want to find out who you are, but also want to find out what understanding level have you achieved. And that is not primarily a comment on you, but it's also primarily a comment on ourselves, right? Because we want to make sure we cover the topics, and we'll have some fun with it. In general, you can chat on YouTube, and like I said, we have a lot of people trying to help as well. But in Discord, there are a whole lot more people who can jump in. So think of it like a more a non-transactional discussion, if you will. If you want to put it on Discord, that'll be great. And Like I said, GitHub, Gitpod. We use Gitpod, and for those of you who've never used this, you'll be blown away by this. Very very cool.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
indeed.
and we have actually come up
Yeah.
with with a solution that's replacing Katacoda. Some of you might have used Katacoda scenarios before, but unfortunately, that got closed. But we have come up with something that enhances Gitpod to kind of uh, come very close to what Katacoda scenarios are. And shortly, some of these workshops will have that as well. In fact, you probably saw a sneak peek of that last week. So if you want to go back and look at the recording, you can take a look
Oh
at
yeah.
that as well. We recently introduced the Astra CLI, okay, which not only takes Astra, which is very easy to use, but takes it one step further from a developer perspective to be able to connect. And you will see a lot of the magic today. All that you do is do an Astra setup and put in your token, and boom, everything happens. Okay, but
Yeah.
that's not all. There's so much more, right? And that's the cool
Oh
part.
yeah.
We even sponsor your learning. We do give you certification vouchers. I mean, not after this workshop, perhaps, but there are ways of getting this. Especially if you attend the Cassandra
Yeah.
Summit, and we'll talk about that. Um, we
Yeah.
just want you to get educated. That's our goal here, right? Like I said, you can submit your homework. We grade it, and then we provide you this cool badge. Yeah, looks very cool.
Yes. Which you should post around to, because that gives you
A-
bragging rights
Absolutely.
everywhere. I
Right,
did the
and
homework.
as our colleague Alex claims, it seems to get your salaries up as well. Huh? Don't hold me to that, but that's what it is. All right. With that said, I think I will stop talking, and I will let Stefano take over with the mentee. Um, okay, just give me a second,
Awesome.
Stefano, before I set this all up.
Okay. Yes. So let me summon the command. So in the YouTube chat, you will see instructions. So you go to menti.com either with your phone or in a different browser tab. I think you can also scan the code that is now on screen.
I will turn on the music. If it's too loud,
And
let me know, please.
okay. So if you go to menti.com, you will be able to enter this code 57511022, or you see it in the YouTube chat. That's for you to join our interactive session. First, now we will just ask you a few questions to know our audience. So what kind of experience you have, what is your favorite language, and a couple other questions. Where are you from? But later, so please keep the connection to Menti open, because later, by the end of this workshop, we will have a small quiz, as Rags mentioned, to, well, reinforce your knowledge and also to check whether we've been good at giving you the main concepts of today. So let's see, we have a bunch of people who already joined. Maybe we wait another few seconds.
My goal is to get to 60%, so I think we should wait for a little bit.
Yeah, I think someone could still join
absolutely.
while we are starting. So I think we can start. And there are just a few questions to find out more about you. So first question, where are you located? For the benefit of our audience, of course, I know that. Rax, you are located in Boston. I am in Italy, so greetings from Italy, but please tell us, where are you from? Okay, so I see a lot of bubbles in the map. So Europe, US, Central America, India, middle of Africa, Indonesia. Is it
Could
Indonesia?
Yeah.
Maybe Malaysia?
A lot of Canadians.
India,
Welcome.
Canada, Montreal.
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm
Wow, everywhere, from
absolutely.
all
And
around the world.
I'm originally from
That's
Bangalore,
great.
and for those of you from India, Happy Republic Day, which is tomorrow. I miss my morning runs in Lal Bagh, in Bangalore. And recently, one of my friends sent me a picture of the flower shows. So if you get a chance, check out the Lal Bagh flower show.
Nice. Okay, so well, a lot of people from everywhere, Saudi Arabia as well. Nice. Okay, so next question, which might be more related to our content of today. This is just to gauge the level of how much we should focus on the introductory part. So did you attend the other 2 weeks of this bootcamp? So the first was Introduction to Cassandra. The second was Data Modeling with Cassandra. So did you attend either or both of them? Okay, so I see the responses are pretty much varied.
Do you want to put the code again? See if...
Yeah, but okay, maybe...
yeah, I think it's coming through. It's coming through.
Okay, so we have... Okay.
Oh, they say this site is not opening, so let's give it a little bit of time. Maybe, Menti is running into some hiccups.
Okay, that's weird. Yeah, I think Menti might have had some trouble because I saw we were at 450.
Yeah, and now it's
50 participants, and then it got.
Yeah.
So let me refresh the command. Menti not working. Sorry about that. Looks like it is at least partially working, but
I mean that's a great segue into our message, right? We are in a world of microservices. And sometimes it's hard to figure out what's yes. wrong. It could be just be the internet connection, but at the same time, it's impossible for me to come up with some service like Menti, which does such a great job, or like a GitHub that you'll see later. But at the same time, it adds a level of complexity that you'll have to deal with.
Yeah, and maybe this is also a prime example of isolated failure, because maybe Menti might have a hiccup, but we are giving you this workshop nevertheless. So that's great. Imagine if you were a monolith.
Yeah, then everything would come down to its knees. That's exactly right.
Okay. I see. Maybe there is a trouble with the background. Okay. I see. So maybe there is something going on with serving the images, which is probably a different service than the questions.
Actually, I should tell you what. If
my guess.
Menti had to fail, I would rather it failed here than during the quiz, right? Because then, so let's hope, pray that it will be fine during the quiz, right? So.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see. Yeah, I see in the comments you should try to select or highlight the text on the page. So maybe there is some trouble for Menti serving the background image.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay.
We should just
so
maybe
we moved to a new template. We rebranded. So maybe that's the problem. So we will try to test drive it again. I'm going to try it myself. Because I've been doing too many things here. So let me try that.
I just go forward with the Menti, and then maybe we can just take care of preparing a different background for a light background for the quiz part. So maybe, if
I will share the code.
Whoever wants to try and join from a different browser, you're welcome to. Okay. So in the meantime, for those who are using the trick of selecting the text just to get an idea, or maybe we can also look in the chat at this point. So you can feel free to answer in the chat, in the YouTube chat as well, just to have an idea. Did you do your homework? Okay, so I see varied responses here. Yeah, for those of you who say there's homework, yes, there is homework. And if you want to get your badge, you should do it. It's very simple, just a bit of coding exercise this week. Last week it was different things, of course. Okay, so shall we move on? And there is probably a last question, if I'm not mistaken.
We have about 10 people who have done everything, right? But no worries again. We will kind of go through that today as well.
Okay, so there is a question how to catch up. We will share the link later. This is whoever joined right now. You haven't missed anything of the content part, which we are about to start. This question about languages, of course, there is always a bit of a heated discussion. I see someone on the Java camp, someone else on the Python camp. Cool thing is that we are covering several languages in this content of today, and we will probably try to cover Python and Java and leave JavaScript as a exercise for the reader. Let's see, but yeah. So I see Python, and Python is overwhelmingly more preferred than Java today. That's not always the case, but that's interesting to know. Undecided.
I think I'm done with this hands-on lab. I'm going. I'm a Java guy, but yeah, Cedric is not happy.
Cedric, please do not spark a language flame war here, because we have stuff to do today. Sorry, I'm joking. Hi, Cedric.
But actually, Stefano,
okay, so let's move on, because
Stefano, if you don't mind, interjecting. I think we talked about this, right? Of course. We said, maybe Python might actually be more popular, and we're going to start with Python anyway, and then a little bit of Java for those of you. So
that's the idea.
I think we kind of kind of anticipated this, and for those of you, who are new to Python, if you want to learn Python, we have another workshop coming up in, 2 weeks, where, one of the influencer Sarma, is going to be, kind of walking you through, a really getting started kind of Python program. Okay. So, all right. So with that said, let's move on. Anything else to add before I go?
Thank you for answering the question, and sorry for the inconvenience about Penti. We will try to optimize it for loading and displaying. Let me take a note. I think you can switch, maybe you did already, to your screen and go on with the content part.
All right. So intro to Apache Cassandra. You might have heard of this ring architecture that we have, right? Essentially, what happens is that, this is a node. There are multiple nodes, right? And these nodes kind of talk to each other. Think about this as a social network where they're all gossiping, right? They're actually using a protocol called Gossip, where they exchange some information more than just a health check. Health check gives you a basic information, but it doesn't tell you whether, I'm getting a lot of data. Why don't you shift my, my traffic onto the neighboring node? In fact, Cassandra actually talks at that gossip protocol level and kind of makes that adjustment in real time, because it has more information than just the health check, right? And that's why it's able to do a lot of these things, especially achieve linear scalability, highest availability. You usually have 3 replicas, so that, if one particular node is down, chances are that gossip protocol has already conveyed this information across the entire cluster, across the entire ring, and the other node is ready to serve up, which has the replica for that piece of data. We will talk about partition key, because that's the easiest way, to achieve what is referred to as order 1, which is constant, right? Order n means, you're going through all the nodes to find the data, which is not efficient by any means. What you really want to do is to be able to achieve constant access. And you can do that by some kind of algorithm called hashing algorithm. And we use something called as a consistent hashing algorithm, which makes it, to put it very simply, but basically what it does is, given a key, it goes exactly to that node. If that node is down, then it picks up from the replicas and does all this behind the scenes, right? My oversimplified view of Apache Cassandra or a NoSQL kind of infrastructure is that, I could do all of this myself. But the problem is what happens when, a particular node is down. What happens when more nodes are added? Let's say I want to achieve scalability by adding, by doing horizontal scaling as we do here. In essence, Apache Cassandra takes care of all of this, right? It is platform agnostic, as you will see. You can create your database, either on Google Cloud or on AWS or on Azure. But today we'll be primarily using Google Cloud and Monk's Corner, and we'll get to that in a second. When I did my computer science master's at University of Southwestern Louisiana, or now called as University of Louisiana at Lafayette, one of the things that I went through was this book by C.J. Date. I don't know if any of you use that, but basically it's about normalizing your data. Okay, so no matter what your application, doesn't matter what your application is, right? You normalize the data, normalize the heck out of it, and then start using it, right? It makes sense to a certain degree. It makes certain sense in a lot of ways, because it's really about achieving the thing called ACID, or atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. But it may not be applicable to all the use cases, right? So what you typically do, and we talked about this, we will send you pointers to the video later about the previous 2 weeks, if you want to go and kind of dig into it, or if you want to understand a little bit more after this workshop, how exactly was the data model done? You can go back and look for that. But the idea is that you start with a conceptual data model, but more importantly, you identify the use cases or identify the access patterns, okay? And then you come up with this logical data model called the Chebotkov diagram, okay? And then you optimize it and actually implement the physical data model, okay? So start with really the use cases. CJ Date's, the normalization form is fantastic, because it's good for, especially consistency and so on, because otherwise you will have to achieve the consistency, in your application sometimes. But again, if you come to the Cassandra Summit in March, you might get a sneak peek on ACID transactions on top of Cassandra with a protocol called Accord, which is a lightweight protocol as compared to, the two-phase commit. And we'll talk about all of this. But essentially, the thing to understand here is that NoSQL and Cassandra is really more applicable, to different use cases and to use case patterns than anything else. But fundamentally, your application development kind of looks like this, right? And I'm probably stating the obvious here, right? You have a front end, which could be your browser or your mobile phone or whatever, right? And then you have what is sometimes referred to as the backend, or sometimes referred to as the business logic, right? Where you kind of do certain things, but to be able to do certain things, you need the database and the backend, right? Or database tier. Okay, so front end, business, and then data, right? And what we're going to see today is pretty much all of these three tiers in action, right? But the focus is really going to be on the driver and the database tier. So how do we model the data, and how do we access the model data, from your application? We're going to see code for both for three, which is JavaScript, Java, and Python. And since Python overwhelmingly won today, I think we will start with Python. Maybe we should move the icons so that Python is first. But
No. Wait. This is important. When I checked the slides, I took care of ensuring there were no preferred languages. So that's why you will see permutations of these three in various places in the deck. That's intentional.
Oh, wow.
That's really intentional. I don't want to give preference myself.
Wow, I didn't know that level of detail. I know Stefano is very detailed, but this is even beyond Stefano. All right. I have done distributed systems for a long time, and
Come on, Aaron.
and I get nightmares when I hear the
Joking.
term Korba. I don't know if any of you heard it. You can put it in the chat. But essentially, I've stood on the shoulders of, basically, I would call them as distributed system stalwarts. You might have heard of the seven fallacies of computing, eight fallacies of computing, and so on. But essentially, what seems to happen is that distributed systems morphs every 10 years or so. Okay, so we started about with the monoliths in the 80s. Remember CICS. If you did a stop run in your COBOL program, it would bring the entire CICS infrastructure down. Not a good idea, right? Like for example, today what Stefano was saying. Let's say we had all of this in one monolith. If Menti was not working, we couldn't have proceeded with the presentation itself, right? So not a good idea. And then what happened was you kind of split up the front end, the back end, and the data tier, into these different tiers. You still have these concepts, right? But the idea is that instead of having this distinct front end, back end, and data, even your front end, right, could be multiple services. Okay, and that's where the service-oriented architecture, came into being. ESB, Enterprise Service Bus, if I remember right? And then, of course, you have the data, which is on SQL databases or NoSQL databases. SQL is fine, NoSQL is better for horizontal scaling and so on. But what microservices does is rather than, having this distinct front end, back end, and data tier, right? What you're going to do is you're going to use services, right? Like for example, we're all used to this. Whenever you're in an enterprise, typically you have something called a single sign-on. So rather than doing it all ourselves, right, we relegate it or delegate it rather to a particular service, right? So we may delegate it to Google, we may delegate it to GitHub sign-on, depending on what. And one of the other popular single sign-on is like Okta. We use that in data stacks, for example, for getting a token that you can use throughout the session, right? In fact, we manifest our data, okay, in NoSQL as a REST service, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. Okay, so it's a very simple, like maybe 2 or 3 services that you see today, but you can definitely extrapolate it, to basically be in a world of services. Okay, so what the heck are microservices?
Yeah.
A good friend of mine, Martin Fowler, who actually also lives in Boston, every time I see the slide, I think of, I should set up a lunch with him at some point, but, our lives have all gotten busy, so hopefully I'll do that soon, but a reminder for myself. But basically, he enunciated a number of these principles, smart endpoints and dumb pipes, and even that is changing. Sometimes the pipes are also intelligent in such a way that they can route traffic to these different nodes, right? It's really organized around business capabilities, and we'll see shortly there is something called a shared nothing architecture. And what do you mean by shared nothing architecture? Basically, again, go back to kind of thinking about like a SSO, like a Okta, like a GitHub single sign-on, or like a Facebook single sign-on, or whatever it's called these days, Meta single sign-on, right? You should be able to kind of, the service should do everything that is required for that particular objective and nothing more than that, something along those lines, right? A lot of things are kind of something that's revolutionizing the way enterprises are working today. It's all about infrastructure automation. There is something called as immutable infrastructure, right? Where you bring up infrastructure every time every time you install something, right? And the idea is that you want to deploy these services, as and when you want it, and to be able to do that entirely by automation. In fact, one of my, I basically, learned about automation recently, where you can use something called as a Dependabot on GitHub, and Dependabot does a great job. What it does is, it goes out, tries to find the Maven, repository and see if the jar files have changed, and it's going to automatically build things for you. And that is how we noticed that there was one problem with one of our Java drivers, and we are kind of working through that. So the idea is that once you automate, it becomes easy to deploy, and once you deploy them as individual units, it becomes easy to scale so that you can meet the demand, right? Think about loose coupling. That's really what it comes down to. I mean, you don't have to talk about microservices, but you can still do loose coupling, in different ways. Okay. What are the advantages? Cost reduction, risk reduction, because you know that, and then also there is this thing about two pizza teams, right? And this is really more of a cultural thing than a technology thing, where let's say a few of us are very comfortable with a NoSQL solution. In another team, which is a team of 8 or team of 6 or whatever, right? They are more comfortable with SQL. So you can kind of mix and match these services to kind of take advantage of the strengths of that particular teams as well. But we know there is no silver bullet in software, right? If that were the case, I would take everything today and move it to microservices, right? Not possible. I in fact have had conversations with a lot of companies who actually have gone to microservices and gone back because they just are not able to deal with the complexity, right? So make sure your cultural changes are happening at the same time as your technology changes and so on. And I can talk ad nauseum about this, but share nothing in real life, right? Again, do you really install a separate DB for each service? Maybe you do, right? But the idea is that if you can kind of again leverage the strengths of the teams, I think that'll be great. Okay, share nothing. Neither do I. No, I share a lot.
Yeah, come
Go
on,
ahead.
compromises all the way.
All right.
All the way.
There are two things. One of the biggest strengths of NoSQL, Cassandra, is that like I said before, its scalability and so on and so forth, right? But I don't know if you're going to talk about the CAP theorem here, but you might have heard of the CAP theorem. And essentially, what the CAP theorem states is, if you have three properties, consistency, availability, and partition tolerance, you can pick only two of them, right? So there is this concept of what is referred to as eventual consistency, where I may not be on top of the leaderboard for a certain, like 15 milliseconds or 15 seconds or maybe even 15 minutes, right? 15 minutes is probably too much, right? But eventually the system will get to a consistent state. Again, one of my good friends, Gregor Hope, if you want to Google and look for him, he wrote a great paper. This was a long time back. That Starbucks doesn't do what is called two-phase protocol, two-phase commit protocol. And if you think about how Starbucks works, and many of the coffee shops around the world work, basically they write your name somewhere, right? And basically what's your preference, and put it off somewhere. So the coffee comes to you, take the coffee, and you're like, oh, this is not what I ordered. All that they do is they throw it out and correct it, right? And if you think about distributed systems, there is a lot of parallels to that, right? You can do what is called as a compensating transactions. So essentially, you don't need to have ACID or very strict ACID, atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. You can also do what is referred to as base or eventual consistency. There is a soft state, but you are primarily thinking about availability, right? You really want it to be available because, again, in today's day and life, if something takes a little bit longer to load, I'm checked out, right? So it's kind of a compromise between ACID and base. Okay. I think I've talked quite a bit about this, but again, it's about share nothing, data isolation. If you know a partition key, it goes to that particular node and no other node unless the node is down. And I think it's a great synergy between reactive programs and responsive data which is where Cassandra shines. So I think it's a great infrastructure for microservices in general. And I've beaten that to death. So before we jump to the first lab, and I'm going to stop talking at this point, Stefano, anything else to add? Any questions that we need to answer?
Well, there is just a point. Well, one point is about, there has been a question in the chat about comparison between Cassandra and MongoDB. And of course, this question comes up a lot. And well, I have to disappoint Kevin because actually we had the first week of this bootcamp entirely around Cassandra itself, and with also comparison to other NoSQL database in passing. Of course, we would go a bit off our topic for today if we start this direction. Well, a big difference. Well, there are a lot of big differences. Actually, I don't even know where to start. Maybe I'll leave for someone in the chat to expand on this, but a big difference is how the distributed data principle is pursued to its natural all node being equal final decision in the Cassandra architecture, which is something that is maybe not unique to Cassandra, but it is a distinguishing feature compared to Mongo. The other is the choice to be row-oriented storage, but there are a few more, and well, yeah, I posted a link to the live recording of 2 weeks ago, so week 1, Introduction to Cassandra, where there is a lot more on the internals and then structure and how do you approach using Cassandra. Unfortunately, today we really have to move on. Maybe we have music. Perhaps I see a comment. You might maybe make it yeah. So I think for now we should move on. Of course, I would like to ask maybe Cedric or someone in the chat to provide a bit more context to Kevin, so we can, in the meantime, we can start with the rest of today. Sorry about that, but really that would lead us a bit off. Okay. Okay, so this is my screen, and I am going to, well, let's move to next slide. Of course, that is first part of the live. But before doing that, now speaking about Cassandra, and well, you might be new to Cassandra, especially if you didn't attend the previous sessions. But well, that's the perfect time to mention a very important thing. In a couple of months from now, there will be finally in-person, very big meeting, the Cassandra Summit in San Jose, California. And whether you are new to Cassandra or you are an experienced user or developer who uses Cassandra, that is a very good way to meet, actually, finally in person in a big celebration of Cassandra, where well, there will be a lot of technical talks on all sides of Cassandra. There will be learning tracks specific to developing and with Cassandra and other topics, and it will be a chance to gather back with the whole Cassandra community, whether it's the first time or not. So we will have a slide later for about that, but something that I would like to remind you already is that you are still on time to go to the Cassandra Summit website and register. And if you do that within, I think, a few days, within the week or so, you will still be able to use the early bird lower registration fee. Now, we will give another reference to that later, so maybe it's time for me to move on. And we are at the first part of the practice for today. First, there was also something in the chat about okay, no, and that's all good. Thank you, Aaron, for having quickly come up with a very short primer on the differences, Mongo versus Cassandra, and we can move to the practice. Okay, so bear with me. First thing, so the goal for today is for you to have a running API backed by Cassandra as persistent storage layer. To do that, first you need a database. So Cassandra comes in many forms and shapes, and you could start your own cluster in your machine or whatever. But today we want to make it easier for everyone. So we can use something called AstraDB, which is a database in the cloud as a service built in a serverless way on top of Apache Cassandra. So what I suggest is, first, I'm giving you the link to the GitHub repo that's appearing in the YouTube chat momentarily. And there is a whole GitHub repository. You actually have it also in the YouTube video description, and that's it. So this is the repository I mentioned earlier with all instructions for you to go through it and set everything up and inspect your code and run the API and the sample code connecting to Cassandra. All of this makes use of AstraDB as the practical database used, which is you can treat it as a flavor of Cassandra as far as protocol and communication with it is concerned. So let's start by creating the database, and as you saw here, making sure the reference tables are there and are populated with the sample data. Okay, so the first thing to do is, you see this big, maybe start from the beginning. Okay, here you see there is a bit of context. That's something we can skip today because we already gave instructions to you. So there is this big orange button here, create AstraDB. So the first step is to create your database here. This button would bring you here to this registration form. You can create an account with your name and password, or Google or GitHub directly, single sign-on. And in any case, I want to stress that there is a free tier, which is what we are going to use today. So there's no, of course, this is all for free. And the free tier is giving you actually a pretty big affordance, a monthly credit that is enough to run not only just test applications, but also actually a small-scale production workload. Both for storage and throughput. So we are going to use the free tier today. So here, if you register here, you will then be able to get to this page. So I will give you a few minutes to set up your account, and you will end up with in an interface like this one, which is the interface for Astra. In particular, I'm looking at the product called AstraDB, which is the database as a service that is part of a wider suite of products. And you see, I'm going intentionally a bit slow to allow you to finish your setup. Let's say once you are in DataStax Astra, you will see here there is a database. Database is entry in the left-hand navigation bar. Of course, this will be empty, right? Because you just have an account like I do. And now it's time to create a database. Now, I prepared the README in this form to have it handy. So let's scroll down. We are creating a database that will be hosting the sample data for today's application. And there are tips here to call the database workshops and the key space sensor data. Now, while we wait for everyone to set up their account and get to this screen, I'll spend 20 seconds with a small introduction. The whole bootcamp is built on an example application, an example data model, which is an IoT sensor collecting application. So there are networks of sensors for temperature or whatever, and they will collect data periodically and write them to some tables in the database. There will be a few slides later, but okay, there's no need now to know much of the details, and that was covered mostly in last week about data modeling. But the point is that we need to not only create a database, but also create initial tables and data in them, so that the API and the code later will have something to read, right? So first, let's create a database. Now, something that was mentioned quickly is that Cassandra is based on tables. So it keeps data in tables. Tables have columns, like the usual. This is very much like the usual relational database. Of course, this is just part of the story. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a NoSQL database, as is it called. The point is that we okay, these tables belong to a single business domain, a single application in this case, and we are going to keep them grouped together in what is called a key space. This is why in the instruction tell you to create a database, and when you create a database, you also create a key space. That's just a grouping of tables, a logical partitioning of tables inside your wider database. So let me create a database. You see there is a nice button here, create database. I'm clicking on it, and as instructed by the GitHub instructions, I'm calling the database workshops and the key space sensor underscore data. Now, this is, I tried to make it larger for everyone to see, but okay, so that would scramble a bit the UI if I make everything too big. So to create the database, we need a name, a key space name, and then you can have the database. In principle, you can have it created in any of these three providers to something that is available to newly created accounts in the free tier is GCP. So please stick with Google Cloud. And well, I'm selecting any region like North America, and there are some regions that are available, some that aren't yet. That's because your account is fresh and new, and that's where I'm clicking on one without the locker icon. So to summarize, database name, key space name, and then you choose provider, GCP, Google Cloud, then area and a region which has no lock. So if you create database here, that's all it takes. Now, I made it very long because I wanted to make sure everyone was with me, and I wanted to very clearly show the process. But actually, you can get your database up and running from nothing to the database there in a couple of minutes. That's what's happening. That is what is happening right now. So while we are speaking, my database and probably yours as well. Okay, I see in the chat someone complains it asks for credit card details. That's actually probably not true unless you went to different cloud providers or other regions. So if you stick to Google Cloud and choose a region that has no lock icons, that should not ask for any detail, any credit card, nothing.
Stefano, there is another question from Kevin from Toronto, originally from Bangalore. Yeah. What is the key space name? You want to take it? Yeah.
Key space name is here, sensor underscore data. You see it in the README, in the GitHub repository.
I think it may be more of a question of what is a key space. I don't know if you talked about that, right? Okay.
Yes, I did. Yeah. I did. But anyway, just to mention, just to remind you while we are waiting for everyone to have their database, the database is the biggest thing, and it contains tables. But to keep everything in order, to keep sorting and a bit of bookkeeping, basically, Cassandra has this notion of key spaces, which are groups of tables. And the meaning is that usually your one application will need several tables. And for a given application, you will probably keep all tables grouped into a single key space. Now, there are exceptions for more advanced usages, but think of that like one application, one key space.
So Bhushan used Azure.
Okay.
You're welcome to use anything you want.
Yes, so,
those will require a credit card though. Okay, and
yeah. So if you want to just get started today without having to enter any details, you should go for a Google Cloud provider and make sure you pick a region which has no lock icon. That would just work. No data asked, because that's.
Yeah, I think Kevin said it. Sorry, go ahead.
That's what the free tier affords.
Yeah, I think Kevin said it's a logical grouping of tables. It's really exactly right. So.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Well, there is a bit more. There is something. There are things that you define at key space level, but not today.
Correct, of
There
course.
is more to say, of course. And there is also a question about key space is matching partitioning. Well, that's not true because partitioning happens within every table on a row by row on a group. So rows are distributed according to partitioning, while a key space is really a much higher level grouping. It's tables being kept together logically, regardless of where they are, where the rows of data are. So every key space contains tables, every table contains rows, and these rows are group-wise distributed over the nodes of your cluster. Okay, thank you, Cedric, for having answered, so I can go on. So while we were speaking, you see my database is now active. Now, that's probably something that happened to you as well. And I ask you to give me a thumbs up in the YouTube chat just to make sure you got to this point where the database is active. You will notice that while the database is active, you are also given something called token. You see, there is here something called token. Now, this would be a database-specific token that will be basically needed to authenticate when you access your database, because it's there in the cloud and you don't want everyone to have the keys to your database. So these are the keys to your database and you should keep them for yourself. Now, this would be a valid token for basic operations on the database. But today we are going to need a slightly more powerful token. That's because of the automation to have everything in the labs work seamlessly very swiftly. So I urge you to just ignore this token for today. We are going to create a more powerful token in a second.
So don't do what I do, but do what I say, right? So in other words, yeah, if you go by the principle of least security, you really want to use a token that has the least privilege. But just to make it easier for us,
yeah. And that would be it. This would be it. Yes. Thank you, Rag. So today we want to make it possible to do more coding, more running applications, and less setup in a sense. So we just forget about this token and reach a bit so this is not a production application, of course. So we can just go there and create a powerful token to fully exploit the automation.
So Cedric put in a great chat in there. Basically it's free forever. Or at least as long as forever is there, right? And you can do 80 million queries a month. You can run some significantly heavy production loads, and you get a $25 per month credit for which you can do what Cedric is saying, 80 million queries and a lot of things like that. It keeps going. If you don't use the 25, you reset and start again next month. So that's kind of how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've never run into
cool.
Quota issues or anything like that. So $25 per month, free, is fantastic.
But this is really a fully serverless deployment. So this is managed for you and in a fully serverless way. So it can scale down to 0 or near 0 if you have low traffic, which is what makes it possible to basically offer any number of databases for free for evaluation with this pretty generous free tier level of quota, storage, and throughput, which is not bad. Okay, so let's assume your database is now active, as mine is.
So if
I can go to database.
I'm sorry, I'm not paying complete attention.
Yeah.
Did you talk about if you already created a database, you can like workshops, you can just add a key space.
Yes.
Right?
Okay. Yeah. So let me go to database. For those of you who already created your workshops database, so I clicked on the go to database, and this is now where I am. Of course, you can access your database anytime in this with this left-hand side navigation button, and here is my workshops. So if I click on workshops, I'm seeing my own database. Of course, this is all brand new, all zero, all fresh, but maybe for some of you this isn't, because some of you might already have created a workshops database and probably with the sensor data key spaces, because that's the same key space as in last weeks. In case you have workshops that you don't have this key space, you can always add the key space, no problem. You can add any number of key spaces as you want. So please stick to the name sensor data as here, because that makes what we are going to run just run easier. So I will assume everyone now has a database called workshops with a
And again,
sensor
if you're
data
running
key
into any
space.
issues, usually it means that you have picked the wrong cloud or the wrong region. So just Monk's Corner and Google is the free tier one. We are trying to, basically do some cost cutting, and that's the reason why we're doing this. Previous workshops, you could pick anything really. Previous, when I say previous, I mean a few months back. But just make sure you're using the Google cloud and the Monk's Corner. And if you're still running into issues, feel free to jump in chat and we'll help you.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so it's time to create a token. Token with enough permission for the later automation to work. So how do we create a token? Now, you see these settings here, this settings part here on the lower left of the navigation bar. Click on these settings here. I hope you can see it. It's between the two of us in your YouTube feed. So I'm clicking this settings part right here. If you can see it, I'm clicking on it, and that leads me to a management page. And you see there is a token management here. If you go to token management, you can create tokens. Now, tokens come in with various levels of permission. As we mentioned already, there is you can create tokens that are more or less powerful, so to speak. Today we need a database administrator token. So there is a nice drop down here where you select a role, and please make sure you choose the database administrator role here. You see? This is all detailed and spelled out in the GitHub README. So don't worry. If you get lost, just head over there and follow the steps. Everything is really, really clear to follow. We went through probably 1 billion iterations of the instructions to make sure there is as little friction as possible for everyone. So just trust it will be very easy to follow if you ever get behind or anything. Okay, not seeing settings on the left side. Great. That's probably because you have a different user interface, the so-called, so you probably have an interface that looks more or less, give me a second, like this. So Joy, if your interface looks like this, then you can go, I hope you are, UI different, Silence Code are the same. So if you have this UI, please check your current organization here, and you will see a menu here, a drop-down with organization settings. Yes, so very good. Thank you for asking. On the upper left, there is this drop-down menu with the organization, and at the bottom, there is organization settings. This is where you go to the same page as before. So that's great, because now we are back to business. Token management, you see, and generate a token with database administrator role. Okay. Or you can switch to the new UI, but I hope I showed the way for both kind of UI. Yeah, we are somehow in the middle of a transition to a new slicker UI, and of course we have all kinds of
combinations.
Care to take, combinations. Okay, so I'm finally ready to generate a token. So let me click on generate token. Bam. Now, this token has been generated, and that's very important to keep this. Of course, I'm showing you my token because I have to, but rest assured I will delete it once we are done, because, of course, that would be a security breach. In other words, keep your token for yourself, please, because that's your thing. And that's a secret that grants everyone access to, that grants everyone access to your database. So I'm bringing up any text editor just because today I'm keeping my token here I'm going to use it later, and you will be too. So the token is made by is composed of 3 parts, something called client ID, client secret, and token. You can also download it in a CSV format. So this is just ephemeral for me, so I'm going to copy everything. Actually, the important part is the third part, the so-called token proper, the one that starts, I hope you can see it, I'll try to make it bigger somehow. The one that starts with AstraCS here, this is the token proper. This is a string that is everything we need today to authenticate with your database. Of course, yours will be different. And I'm keeping this string ready for later. And later is very soon, actually. We will soon be giving this string to the automation to set up access to your database. Okay, so please let me know if you get to the point of creating and copying the token in a place for later usage. And I think this part of the practice stops here, so please. Okay, someone managed to get the point of having the token.
Yeah,
Great.
I think we have a lot of thumbs up, so I think we are doing pretty good. Yeah.
Okay.
I think there was a question
Of
about
course.
can we talk about the different UIs? And I think it was answered by Akram Ahmad. If specifically you're referring to the Astra UI, you can click and get the new UI if you want. But if you're talking about UIs in general, we can talk about that too. We have how you can do that with Swift. We have examples with Warden. Again, if you go just look at our YouTube repository, we have a whole bunch of those about different UIs.
Yes. Anyway, in this very moment, I'm showing how to switch from the old UI to the new UI, and that's in your upper right corner drop-down menu. But anyway,
thank you, Akram, for doing it in the chat. This is how we kind of help each other.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you. I think this is now time to go back to the slides, and there we are. So I'm going to resume the presentation from here with. So, okay, we created the database, and we created, oh no, wait, we have to create the schema and populate the tables. That's very important. Otherwise, what can we do with no data in our database? Come on. And nobody was telling me anything.
I should have told you that.
Okay, so we are here in Astra. I have my token, and now it's time to head back to the repository. So I'm keeping this a bit wider, so we can keep it here. Okay, so we went through the create AstraDB. We went to the administrator token. And in case there are questions, please ask in the chat so I can move on otherwise. You have the token, keep it ready. Now we have to start Gitpod. Now, we already mentioned that Gitpod is a very cool thing. Maybe I will let moving around. I will let Gitpod speak by itself. So you see this Gitpod button in the repository, open in Gitpod. So now I'm going to open in new tab or middle click, whatever. I just want to keep the repo open as well. So I open in a new tab. Now what happens? Well, actually a lot, because okay, you might have to authenticate with Gitpod for this to happen. So you will find a login with GitHub model. You just give it permission, and now this is what's happening. A lot of stuff, right? So you see, this is all in your browser, but it looks like VS Code, right? So actually what's happening is that within the Gitpod machines, the Gitpod instances, a container is started for you, which will run basically what is a VS Code server, and in your browser, a UI is running, which is connecting to it and offers you a Linux box with, you see, a file editor and file viewer on the top.
Hey, Stefano, this is a great time because I think Rivik saw the UI that I saw, which. So, do you want to mention that?
Yes.
Before, yeah.
Okay, so two things. One is that let me, you might see, this is spelled out in the repo. You might see a dialog about opening this workspace in VS Code desktop. And you can just forget and close this model. And I think that's it. Otherwise, you might be seeing something
this is the one I ran into
different.
where it asked me, right? You know, which.
Yeah. So let me fetch it. So you might be seeing something like these. Let me bring that in focus. Something like this. If you're seeing something like this, you should paste the URL to the repo here and choose this option, context URL. And editor, that should be okay. VS Code in the browser should be good. And the rest you should, I guess you're okay with leaving everything default. There is a bit of a unpredictable, I think there is some kind of A/B testing by GitHub at this point. So that might be it. I'm not sure. But anyway, if you have paste explicitly the full URL to our repository, choose VS Code latest version in the browser and just proceed.
You could try IntelliJ and let us know if it works, but I would just stick with the VS Code. I think one of the cool things about Gitpod is it's so configurable, and you don't have to do installs yourself because all of that is set up, and perhaps the most important thing from a workshop perspective is you can take this home. You can keep playing with it for as long as you want. And it doesn't get deleted until, unless you haven't used it for like a week or so, something like that.
So while we are speaking, I'm making the console font a bit bigger for easier display in your, maybe too much, but let's see how it works. Maybe that's good enough. Well, it might be clunky, but at least you see everything that I'm typing. And maybe the editor not particular needs. So okay, that should not be needed for you, just for me to make it easier to see.
David has a question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, you can work locally. You can do everything locally. You might have to install a few things as like the Astra CLI. So we don't have time to give instructions specific to running locally, but of course, this is something you should do if you prefer to work locally. And you just have to inspect the Gitpod YAML file, which by the way is here in the repository itself, and it just installs a couple of things. You can work from here. It seems like you know what you're doing. So if you look at what happens in the Gitpod YAML, you will find out what you have to install and prepare for this to run.
You will have to adjust some of the paths. Like, for example, we take it for granted /workspace /workshop Cassandra application development, as you can see there. So you have to adjust some of those.
Yeah, so you can definitely run locally, but you have to adjust a few things for yourself. So that's why. Well, that's one of the advantages of Gitpod, right? It offers a fully uniform workspace, and we don't have to spend time after each individual snowflake laptop of all of you. So we are just on the same page here. And
that's all we are going to talk about local, David. If that answered your question, please let us know in the chat.
Yeah, and of course, if you meet problems, of course we can help maybe here if there's time, but probably on Discord anytime. So the discussion on Discord stay there for good. So please don't hesitate. Okay, so so Gitpod comes with Astra CLI installed, and which will be the tool for us to speed up setup. Well, not that there is much to do, but still, you remember the token we created, the DB administrator token. Well, it's time to give it. So I'm trying, maybe I can reconfigure my, okay. Let's see, okay. Maybe I can switch the tab here. Sorry about that, but I can, yeah. So that should make everything easier to do. So, okay, we are here. Configure the Astra CLI. Okay, so if I run this is really big. Okay, let's try like this. If I run Astra setup, Astra CLI is this Astra program. It is installed already, and I just have to provide my token here. So this is what you should do. I go ahead and fetch my Astra CS string, copy, and I'm pasting it here. Now, if I hit enter, that's it. I just set up my Astra CLI to be, let's say, configured to use my own database. That's all that is needed. As a proof, I can do AstraDB list now, and it will use the token to access the so-called DevOps API. Have a list of, well, that's not very well formatted. Yeah, now there we are. I will later resize the two consoles. You see, I have one database with these and these properties, status active and whatnot. And I also do AstraDB get workshops to get more details on this one database. So you see the default key space, creation time, a lot of things. So this is just to confirm that Astra is configured and the token is valid and makes it possible to programmatically act on the database.
Somebody in the chat claims that Astra CLI is slick. I'm not quite sure who it is.
Oh, someone called Cedric, who knows? Okay, can you up test to see again? Text, sorry, yes. You mean the repo here, Astra setup. So all the commands are here. I'm pasting in the YouTube. I'm pasting on YouTube the step we are at. Okay, so if Cedric, if I do the font bigger, oh, maybe that might work. Thank you. Okay, great. Okay, so we are here, Astra setup. Then just as a test, I showed AstraDB commands. There are a lot of them, so you can do Astra help, and you will see how many things are there. Now, what I was saying is that Astra is very handily connected to your database, which makes it very quick to, well, maybe we can skip this one. I can just launch the initialization script. So this is the command, AstraDB SQLSH workshops, and then execute this file. Now, let me just paste it in here. AstraDB, that means run SQLSH connected to my database and database workshops, and please run directly the initialize SQL script, which while this runs, I'm going to quickly show. It's here, and it's a series of SQL, that is Cassandra Query Language commands, that, well, they make sure you get to this point with the right shape of all tables. So it drop tables. Of course, this is something we do because we know this is a test kind of environment, and creates tables. You see, okay, most of this was discussed in the previous week about data modeling. So there is a table called networks. There is a table called temperatures by network, and sensors by network, and temperatures by sensors. Each has some columns. Some of them make the primary key. Within the primary key, a subset of column is the so-called partition key, which, to come back to a question that was there, has to do with how the data for a table is partitioned across the cluster.
Stefano, can you increase
sadly,
the font
there is no time to.
On GitHub.
Yeah, but that's already pretty big, I think. But I can try. I'm afraid just there will be not much to show. Let's try 22. I don't know. More. I think more would just not make. Okay, maybe that's good enough.
Much better.
So there are tables being created, and after the tables are created, there are also a bunch of insert statements. You see a lot of them. We don't need to care now, but that's just to make sure we have tables, and in tables there are some rows. There is data to read, to later read. That's just it. Okay, so
basically it's kind of this simulation of the sensor data, right? You can imagine this kind of streaming through. And Cassandra can just handle it without any issues.
Yes. So all the writing part of this application is mocked. So we just have tables with data, and we test an application that makes it possible to read the data in various ways. More on that very quickly later, but the point is that I just run the code to the Astra CLI instruction to run this script. So I'm pretty sure my database now has tables, and in the tables there is the data I expect. So you see network, ForestNet, and sensor 1003 at a given time was reading a temperature of 101.5, and it is at this latitude and longitude. This is the kind of data we have in these tables. More on that later when we are reading that through code. So this is now just a script. I'm closing it because that might be confusing at this point. Okay, so we can run some queries if you want. Maybe very quickly. I can ask Astra to just open a CQL SH, which is the Cassandra shell to run commands manually. I can ask CQL SH to connect me to my database in a CQL shell, which is again a console specific to. I can use sensor data to go to my own database. Oh, I was there already anyway. So you see there are some sample queries here. I'm not spending much time on those, but maybe just so you know, let's say I want to read a bunch of data for a given network and a given time range. This is how it works. So I can paste this query, and there are the results.
And by the way, I know
now,
we
this
are
is something,
so carried away with the Astra CLI, but we should mention the dashboard, right? In other words, the Astra dashboard. So if some of you, some of your colleagues who are data scientists and are not comfortable with using the, the CLI, you can still kind of do that. I mean, you still have to know SQL, which is our Cassandra query language, which is very similar to SQL, but you can go into SQL console, which is great, and kind of play with it. Yeah.
And that would be it here. Yeah, so it's an in-browser version of this console, which directly connects you to the same database, but I'm not doing that now. Anyway, this is just to show that you can run queries, and, well, predictably, what you get back is portions of table with some rows and some columns. That's more or less the general idea of the queries. Of course, this was covered more in detail last week, so I'm just exiting here and getting ready for the next steps of today's practice. Anyway, all of these queries and what to do and how to run them is spelled out in the repo. So you are encouraged to spend some time and inspect the script and play with the queries, run them, and so on. But now today it's about application development. So let's move on and make the needed secrets and connection parameters available to the application we are about to run. And that's where the Astra CLI automation is very handy, because instead of having to manually gather addresses, connection parameters, and a lot of small things, you can just run this command and ask Astra CLI to create a .env file, which is there, has been just created, and it actually contains much more than we need today. But this is a comprehensive list of all secrets and connection parameters you will ever need to connect to your database in all ways. You see there, by the way, if you're curious, you can also, there are also GraphQL ways and REST API ways to connect to your database. And this is thanks to a layer plugged on top of Cassandra called Stargate. We are not going to use it today except in the tree, because it acts as a proxy for SQL, a pass-through SQL kind of thing. But if you're more familiar, well, actually, we are going to speak a bit about other API paradigms. So let me just skip this. The main point is that this AstraDB create.env has just created this file. I mean, if you prefer to avoid that, you can also make it manually, I think. But that's, yeah, so we can just, I mean, the important thing is that we have a token here, and we have a secure bundle here, which is a file containing additional routing and proxy information and some certificates for the secure connection, TLS connection to your own individual instance of the database. That's it. That's all been done for you. So basically, this env is there, and what you can do is to source it if you want, and make sure there is an instruction to just check that everything works. If you run this, you will probably just see that there is also a zip file. This is something without the Astra CLI, you could download manually and just make it available to the drivers. It contains necessary information to connect to your database, but that's all done for you by the Astra CLI. So with the setup, we are done. I hope most of you could follow and get to this point with me. So please, if you give me a thumbs up, if you got the CLI to do this work for you, and if you got to the point of having the .env created and ready to use, that would be great. Okay, so that's
good job, Yogaraj.
Nice
Helena.
Yeah, I see also.
Yeah, well done, Joy.
Well done, well done. Okay, so I think we can move on. While
I'm trying to spell that. I mean, pronounce that. Cool.
Hey,
Ryan, welcome back.
Maybe.
It's nice to see Ryan back in here.
Oh yeah, nice. Okay, so let's move on. REST APIs. Okay, Ryan, nice to see you. Ryan, you see the new branding of the slides, by the way. Okay, so let's go through this part pretty quick. Okay, maybe JIT 987, I might ask someone in the chat to assist you so I can proceed. Well, there's not much to say, but something I briefly mentioned today we're going to run a REST API. But before diving into the REST API, maybe 1 minute on the on other alternative ways of writing, constructing and designing APIs. Just mentioning, there is something called gRPC. So there are various ways for services to communicate, right? And each service has its own pros and cons, and maybe they are more suited to different kinds of communication. So there is something called gRPC that's from Google, and that's a very efficient way that, however, requires a bit more setup and is usually not much suited for client-to-server communication. It's more, in general, at least, it's more like a server-to-server, service-to-service kind of backend only thing. Anyway, it goes through a definition of very strict schema-full structures, and then that's compiled into code stubs, and then with the final goal of making the actual payload of communication as small as possible. So if you aim for performance, maybe at the expense of flexibility in a sense, that's where you should go. But there's also something called GraphQL, that's graph query language. That's in a sense, maybe not anymore the new kid on the block, but a pretty recent addition to the API paradigm family. And that's very slick, and it has its own applications where it shines. It was, it has been adopted by more and more services, GitHub, for example, to name one. And the idea is that you have a single endpoint which exposes a schema of the full business domain that it covers. And then these single endpoints can get queries where in the body of the query, the full structure of what you want back is defined. And then the client, which has issued the request, will get back exactly what it needs, no more, no less. That's a very powerful, in a sense, and very economical way of communicating between services, and maybe even more between applications and servers, especially when it comes to low bandwidth and let's say limited conditions such as mobile networks and whatnot. But today we're going to fall back, in a sense, let me say fall back, not in a pejorative way, to REST, representational state transfer. Raise your hand if you've never seen a REST API in your life. I think no one probably should raise their hand, because REST is the grandfather of APIs today. In a sense, it's maybe not the grandfather, but it is the most used API paradigm, the API architectural style. The general idea is that you have several URLs, each one corresponding more or less to a different resource or entity, whatever it is that the API exposes to the outside. Yeah, come on. Okay, so the idea is that there are entities or resources, and they are represented each one by a different URL. So you see there might be different URLs for sensors, for measurements, for networks, and so on. And through a series of different verbs, basically the CRUD operations are mapped to verbs. So creation, reading, updates, and deletions of entities, of resources in a very general way are performed by verbs, by HTTP verbs usually, even though that's not strictly a specification of the REST. Well, REST is not even a specification, it's more a style of structuring your APIs. And it actually gives you a lot of leeway in how you implement the details, even though there are, of course, idioms or best practice, if you want, like the proper return code and whatnot.
So
anyway,
Stefano, I just want to interrupt for a second. Is that in this particular case we have the example of to-dos, and this was used in last year's bootcamp. And if we have time permitting, we'll talk about this. But basically, this is what is referred to as the Swagger or the Open API interface, and this was for to-dos. And if you go back to last year's bootcamp, this is exactly the specification that we use, because there is a to-do ecosystem there. So if you want to go one step further, you can try this out after you're, done with today, and kind of take a look at this. And if you have some time, we will talk about this. But today we are using the sensor network, and you will see the corresponding REST APIs.
Yeah. Yes. So of course there is more, and we hope at least to give a pointer for those of you who want to dig deeper. So today we're going to implement a REST API, in short. And well, why? Maybe because we want to focus on how to connect with the drivers and to the data layer, which makes the REST part, the API implementation part thinner. Of course, REST, as any other API, has its pros and cons. There are various things to consider. Well, REST might be best to decouple client and server, because you don't need, in a sense, you don't need to know the schema in advance. You can just issue a query and look at what comes back, which is, of course, a good thing, but also a bad thing in a sense. REST makes it easy to handle versioning. You can just have V2 alongside V1 in a very easy to handle way. And being very established and respectable, it has a very rich tooling, and it is very mature. Of course, there is a big tooling around that. There is, on the other hand, for example, as opposed to GraphQL, REST does not come with its own discoverability mechanism, even though there are, of course, Rags just mentioned Swagger, Open API. There are specifications to make a uniform way of describe what you get from REST API, what kind of structures you have to exchange with REST. One might also remark that sometimes XML for sure, but sometimes also JSON might make communication a bit more verbose, so might saturate bandwidth unnecessarily. My personal point to add here is that sometimes you have a lot of calls to just achieve what is a single goal from the caller point of view. So you have to go through different calls just to perform what looks like a single operation. And I think that is probably 100 years old, more or less. Good point, Kevin. Well, that's not a bad thing in itself. I mean, it really works well, right? So it is not going away. I think
Kevin is one of those geeky guys. He's probably talking in binary terms there, but point taken. 100 years.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, so basically, the important point is that REST is very well poised to. It's the same shape of the CRUD operation underneath, which makes implement easier in general in terms of levels of abstraction that are involved between the API and the underlying database, which is one of the reasons why today we are going to stick with REST. Okay, so now let's move on to what to do in the code finally. So sensor application. Now, this is something we touched already, and I'm just showing that 1 second. This is the data model for today. No need to go into details, but there are networks. Each one is made by several sensors, and each sensor will, in principle, write always new measurements. So there will be also entities called temperature measurements, which come with a value and a timestamp. That's more or less the idea. Of course, this is just a mention, and an important part of the data model, if you've been with us last week, is that you first look at what your application should do and what kind of data it should retrieve in which order, how is the flow through the application, and this tells you how to design your tables. So this is now something that I'm just mentioning, just to put a bit of context into what comes next, the kind of queries that are going to be run. But the point is that you shouldn't design the table, and that's a property of Cassandra. That's how you model data in Cassandra. You shouldn't start creating the table unless you know. First, you should look into what kind of queries you want to run, and then you design the table in the best way according to how the query will, so to which query you want to run. So that's important because you see here there are queries such as find information about all networks, or find raw measurements for a particular sensor on a specified date. These are the queries. These are the data access patterns that form the workflow through your application, and then you create the table. This has all been done for you. You remember the table creation script, so I'm just flashing by. And today, coming back to this 3-tier sketch, today we have a database that I guess now it's clear that is going to be the particular. So it's going to be Cassandra, but in particular, it's going to be the database, the AstraDB instance you created. The database is read and in principle could be written by the backend, so the API, which is going to be a REST API. And this internally will use drivers as opposed to other ways of communicating, as we just saw. And then there will be, in principle, a front end, which today will be obviously just a command line HTTP request. So there is no graphical end today. I mean, we are focusing on the API, the part that actually speaks to the database.
Basically, we're
right?
implementing the REST service.
Okay, so drivers. Yeah, the middle part of this. So drivers. Well, drivers. There are drivers to connect to Cassandra in most of the major languages you see here. Today, in particular, we are focusing on Java, Python, and Node, but that's not the end of the list. So more or less all drivers for Cassandra implement the same set of very advanced features. You see some of them listed here. So they offer support for retries, load balancing on the client side, basically on the driver side, connection pooling, authentication, SSL, awareness of partitioning. So in a way that if you look for a specific part of the table, a specific partition of the table, the drivers will know how the table is distributed across the nodes and will just go straight to the nodes that have the data. So there are a lot of cool things in the driver. So reactive, API, asynchronous, you name it. So there is basically, these drivers are really built exactly to exploit all of the possibilities that Cassandra itself offers. There is also something called Object Mapper that most of you probably know what it is. I'm just mentioning that for later. If there is time, Rags would like to show you something more. But today, first we will run something which has no object mapping, and then maybe there will be something more. Okay, so how do you install the drivers? Well, that's just language dependent, and it is not something that would surprise you. So oh, come on, this is, okay, sorry about that. So in Python, you do a pip install. In Maven and in Java, you just add your dependency as instructed by the package instruction, npm install, I mean, something really as you would expect. So this is how you install the drivers. And now the important thing. When you create a connection with the drivers, what you do in the code is you create a session which will keep the connection alive to your Cassandra cluster, right? What you have to specify is at least one, but possibly more, I would say 3 contact points. So some, and I stress just some of the nodes that form the cluster you should provide. Let's say the IP address or the domain name. Then the drivers by themselves ask these, in this example, there are 2. The drivers ask the 2 nodes, hey, who are your friends? What is the full shape of the cluster? The 2 nodes know that because of the gossip protocol that Rags mentioned, and they answer back the driver. And now the drivers has full knowledge of the full cluster and is able to route queries and to act to enact load balancing and to route queries to the right node by itself. So this is it. And that's a very slick thing, right? So when you create a connection with Cassandra in the drivers, you just provide a couple, let's say 3, the address of 3 nodes per each cluster, per each data center, more precisely. And the rest is automatic from there, including, and that's important, including token-aware routing. So unless you explicitly turn this off, every query will be routed to the nodes that have the data you need, or will need. So the nodes responsible for that partition in the table. So you have the best, the highest optimization possible in this sense. Okay, so this is just mentioning because you will see that in the code. This is how you create the session. Nothing unexpected here, right? So I'm looking at the Java example. There is the SQL session builder in a fluent interface kind of thing. You provide addresses, port, key space name, data center, and credentials, and then bam, you have your session. Or in the Python case, something very similar. You create. So there is an object encoding the authentication. You create the cluster, and then you call the connect method by providing the key space. And similarly in other languages. So you end up with a session object. Now, just think, of course, in case of AstraDB, which is living in the cloud, and it has a slightly more involved architecture, you cannot just directly go to the nodes. There is a lot of layers in between. And there is the need for TLS, secure communication, and that's all handled for you by just providing this zip file I mentioned earlier. So no question asked. You just need bundle and credentials. This has been all handled for you by the .env creation, by the way. So no need to spend much time on this. But the only thing is that instead of providing the IP address of your cluster of a node in your cluster, you just give this bundle and it will contain everything that's needed. It will just work magically for you. So this is an example how you do that. So you see this secured zip file I just provide in place of providing an IP address or more in general. Okay, so no big points on this, nothing that is not found on the code itself. So let me go on. Now the very important thing. When you write your application, be it an API or a script, whatever, you should aim at having a single session object because that's stateful. That will be that takes resources, keeps sockets open. So you should dispose of it when you close the application and when you want to free resources. And it should be a singleton. So you should not create more than one session in your code. That's also because it is absolutely thread safe, so no problems with that.
Pay special attention here because some of these might show up in the Menti quiz.
Yeah, wink, wink. Okay, so let's say we have a session. How do we run queries? That's very simple. You call the execute method. That's very much the same in all languages. And this method invocation will, behind the scenes, will run the queries and send the query to the server and start collecting results and do all kinds of things for you. And then you will have, in general, an object to iterate over and to read row by row what came back. So that's more or less the important thing. Of course, you should avoid hard coding parameters in the string with the command itself, and you should more aim at how you see here in the last example, by passing placeholders and then a list of variables with the values, but that's maybe explained by looking at the code. Just the detail, you know that JavaScript has a very weak type system, to say the least. So in the particular case of JavaScript, you should provide explicit type hints, because the driver should encode variables in a typeful format, because the CQL protocol requires that. So it needs to know whether you are sending an integer or a double or whatever. So that's why you have to do that. Okay, so that's if you look at the code, you will find everything here. Okay, so now there is an important thing, the concept of prepared statements. What you saw earlier, like this, is just, I'm just running a valid SQL statement with arguments. So I'm reading rows, and that's it. So this would be parsed and executed, basically. But in this case, I am splitting this operation in two parts. First, I'm preparing a statement. That means that I'm just asking the driver to parse the statement and check that its shape matches the table, sort of. Types, variables, columns, everything. And that will create something pre-cooked both on the cluster side and on the client side. So that later, when I call this execute, if I execute the prepare statement, everything will be faster, because there will be no need to parse anything anymore, and the types will be already checked, and it will be just ready to be shot over the network. So in particular, if you're running statements several times, as is usually the case, if you're running the same statements just with a different argument, for example, you should definitely prepare your statements.
So
to save bandwidth.
So is the analogy like, if you prepare your meal from scratch versus, kind of warming up something that you already have, right? That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so this is something you can do in all languages. Now there is a slightly different syntax, no big deal. By the way, maybe it's a good time to mention you find all of the whole slide deck in the GitHub repository for later reference, and you also find documentation on the drivers on the net. So no need to spend some time on this. So, okay, the prepare statements have the advantages I just mentioned. So basically you save network bandwidth, and the validation of the metadata, the validation of the types and the shape of the statement against the nature of the table is done only once, and then everything is ready to just shoot the minimum over the network in subsequent calls. That is the data itself, the data of the parameters. And yeah, so that's why prepared statement might save a good chunk of time if you're running a lot of different statements. Yeah. Okay. So time to move to the next part of the exercise. So I'm going to Gitpod again, and we move on to, at this point, I'm moving to Python. So the next part of the practice is, of course, language specific. So I choose the Python path you see here. And the first thing is this. So this part of the practice will be into sections. First, we just run a couple of scripts to make sure everything runs as you can imagine. Second, there will be an API to run, a small API that serves data from these tables. So first, I have to cd Python. And then this is Python specific. I want to install the requirements. So there are just a couple of dependencies. among which you see if I open the Python directory, there is these requirements, and you see there is Cassandra driver, of course, plus other things. But that's important. That's where you install the drivers, as you saw. The next part is I can just run code. So this very first script, let me open it quickly. This is just creating the connection. So let me dismiss dialogues. Okay, so this is just reading from a system table to make sure everything, the connection works. And you see there is this nice get session method. This it is actually done once for all exercises in this separate module DB connection, which, well, this basically loads the secrets from the .env, which is not so important, but then here it creates a session. And it creates a session much like you saw in the slides. So cluster, and then session equal cluster connect, and then a return session. Now, if you look closely, this is structured in a way to implement a singleton. That's because if I, for some reason, if I call get session repeatedly, the code makes sure that you just get the one and only session that the code creates. And that's something that we just mentioned. So let me run this just connectivity small test. So Python x00 connectivity, that should just work. And if it does, yes. So it just tells me what is the data center, what is the cluster name, and nothing else. So nothing interesting, except it tests that my connection works. So now something more interesting. This is reading from one of the tables. So let me just run it, and then I'll quickly show the code. Python x1 query q3. So this is running one of the queries in the application workflow. You see, this is all sensors for a given network. You see, for this network, it is reading 2 rows, and it is telling me some details of these rows. So it's reading from a network table. And if you look at the code, well, it creates a session, and then it just runs this execute method, and then it iterates over the result and prints some data read on it. So nothing unexpected in a sense, and that's what it does. And now let me run a slightly different variant of this code, 1b. Okay, so this is going to run and give the very same output, except, okay, there is a different network, but it runs in the same way. But if you look at this x1b, there is a big difference in that it uses prepare statement. You see, in this line, I prepared the statement, not giving the value of the network, just the shape, if you want, the syntactical shape of the statement. This is ready, validated with the server, and then I just run execute, and I provide a network name as argument, and the rest is the same. So these two, it's important to compare these two, because the 1b is, let's say, the way to go, in a sense. That's a bit more complicated if you want, but this is the way to go if you are for performance. If you want to save, avoid useless network trips. Okay, so that's it for running, let's say, standalone exercises. Now it's time to run the API. And that's very simple. Okay, so I'm using Fast API as a framework. Here, nothing. So this is a very minimal example of Fast API application. You see, I create an API here, and I attach just a couple of endpoints to it. And inside the endpoints function, I have a session. Well, there is the very powerful dependency injection Fast API technique, but the point is that this is get DB session as usual. The DB connection gets to the endpoint function, and then I just session execute something which is a prepare statement, and I just return a JSON with some data on it. So if you allow me to just run the API, I'm going to use UVcorn API app. That's just the API running. So UVcorn is this ASGI engine to power modern Python API applications. Now, you have noticed that I have two consoles. Now you see why. On one console, the API process is running, and I can just make it smaller to allow for the other console to run my requests, which is my client today. So I'm going to use HTTP, but if you like curl, you find curl instructions. That's really much the same. I'm hitting my locally running API with a get on the endpoint sensor by network, and you see sensor by network is this endpoint here, and it has a variable path parameter network, which is going to be the argument of the query that I'm running. So let me run this request. Now this took a couple of seconds because it was the first time and the session was lazily constructed. So let me run it now. Okay, that's much faster. You see, that's exactly what I get back.
Hey, we got the API
So
working.
nothing, yeah, it works. So you see, I'm hitting my API with a request and I'm getting back a JSON with all the things. So this is a REST endpoint. I'm hitting a get verb on a given endpoint to get all properties of a given sensor or all sensor in a network, sorry. There is also another different request to run, which is a post this time, and there has been a bit of a discussion whether a post makes sense here. Okay, so let me just run this. This is a post, but actually it is just to query data again, just in a different way. I'm asking for a list of all measurements by a given sensor on a given date, and that's what it gets back. So values and timestamps, all good, all nice. And as far as the Python part is concerned, that is it. Now, I know I have skipped some slides. I'm saying that to Rags as well, but that's because I am looking at the time. So the technical stuff involved, I've just mentioned while we were running the exercise, how the code is structured, something similar, and there's probably no time for go to this. And sensor API we just running the API, sending request and looking at the code. I've done that for the Python case, and I think I can stop here and give it back to Rags. Maybe you can do a very quick tour of something about Java.
Let me do
just
that,
to
and
complete
I'll promise to keep it really brief. Okay, so hopefully you can see my Git session. It's all set up and ready to go. Okay, and what I have is the Java version here, and I think Stefano talked about the endpoints here. Let me see if I can increase the font a little bit. But basically, what you can see here is you can see the sensors by network, and some of the REST endpoints here as well. So essentially this kind of does the same thing, but now what it does is it invokes the Java driver for this, right? So you can see here you prepare a statement here on line 52, and then what you do is you execute that prepared statement, and then you get back a result set and do whatever you want with it, right? So kind of the same similar concepts with with the Java driver as well. Now, if you want, again, from a Java perspective or really from any language programmer perspective, it's easier to deal with data as an object, right? I don't want to, if it's JSON or whatever format it is, I am comfortable with objects, okay? And we haven't really, I mean, again, it's a little bit of controversy of whether we want to introduce an object mapper in today's session, and we did not, consciously did that because it might complicate the discussion a little bit. But for those of you who are really interested, you can go back to last year's bootcamp, okay? And I'm going to bring this up. So basically, you can see here, bootcamp full stack apps with Cassandra, okay? And it was week 4, and all that you need to do is go to github.com/datastacksdevs. You can see here, I'm kind of highlighting that, right? And here it shows the concept of an object mapper. Okay, and essentially what it does, it takes your data and maps it into object. As a programmer, very easy for me to deal with this. And this is a little bit different data model. Different data. I mean, I shouldn't say a little bit. It's completely different, right? It's a to-do item. But again, recordings for this are all available, and you can just use the object mapper, to essentially take your data and map it as an object, and then as a Java programmer, as whatever programmer, right? It's easier to deal with this. And I think there was a discussion in the chat about ORM, object relational mapping. This is not something new, not fundamentally
Yeah.
new, but makes it a lot easier, and you can kind of walk through the code. Again, all of these supported by the driver,
Yeah.
and you can use this. I don't think,
Yeah.
yeah,
Except Rugs, except in this case it would be OM because these
no
are
relational
object
mappers.
mapping,
Yeah,
no
yeah, exactly.
relational. So that's Cassandra, right? No joins, no relations,
Good,
no foreign keys.
good point. Yeah, but
Yeah, that's funny.
definitely the inspiration comes from ORM. DAO, DTOs,
Indeed,
and
of
all
course.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm joking. Yeah.
Okay, let me turn it back to you. That was a very, very brief walkthrough of Java. I could have ran through the code, but believe me, it's exactly the same. So not really a big deal. But let me turn it back to Stefano because kind of running out of time here.
Okay. Yeah. So okay. So we are wrapping up at this point. There is a question: how come Cassandra is NoSQL? Well, there could be hours to speak about that, and indeed there have been. That's why I suggest you to tune in, because I'm sure we will run a new Introduction to Cassandra and Introduction to NoSQL workshop soon. We run them now and then, or you can look up in our YouTube channel, and you will see there are recordings of those. So very shortly, whatever the status of the NoSQL label, because there might be also debate whether it makes sense to use that as a label altogether. Alex, looking at you. No, sorry. Cassandra is definitely NoSQL in that it goes beyond the relational paradigm, and it does that as the only performant way to support very big data. That's the story, if I have to summarize it in one sentence. Of course, there is much more, and we can't go into detail now. Very sorry, but we are already 1 minute past the mark. So you are encouraged to look closely at the code examples in this repo. You are even more encouraged to come back at us with questions, and even embarrassing questions. We are glad to help you have your application run, and maybe even more. So please join us on the Discord. We will give you a link later. So I think it's really time to wrap up now. And shall we try? Rex, did you manage to do something for the quiz?
Oh, was I supposed to?
Rex,
Was I supposed to
did
give you the
you?
quiz or?
No. Shall we try to run the quiz as is?
Yeah,
Maybe
haven't
let's
done
see how
anything.
it works.
Yeah.
Okay, so I hope you are still on the quiz. Let me back to these, and again,
Oh, I was supposed to change the background. I did not. I didn't get the time.
Oh, not live. I don't think it would even work to do that live. So let's see how that works. Okay, so please join us for a couple of questions on what we saw
if it's
today.
too loud, let me know, please. And give me 1 second because.
So, okay, we are going to have a couple of questions on what we saw today. This time, you not only have to answer the correct answer, to give the correct answer, but you also should do it fast to win, because there will be a leaderboard, and faster answers will gain more points. So let's see how it goes. Yeah, you see the link is menti.com, and the code to enter is in the YouTube chat. What I suggest is you don't look in the YouTube live for the questions, because there is a slight delay. So you better keep an eye on your own Menti page. Let's see, shall we start? And yeah, let's give another half a minute or so. Of course, what we saw today was just a very quick introduction. There are, luckily, we provide a lot of examples, more complicated examples on writing APIs, connecting with the drivers, also with other things than the drivers, such as the cloud native APIs to connect with AstraDB. What we really would like for you is to Yeah, someone says it's not loading. I think 20 is really having a bad day, so I'm not sure what could be done. Let's try, shall we? Otherwise, let's try. So quiz
Yeah,
time.
this is loading well. So let's see. Let's keep going. Let's hope.
But again, I stress that this is a good example of. Okay, no questions now. A good example of. Yeah, I think that's really something going on here in Menti. But okay, let's start. Question number 1.
Yeah,
how many SQL session object you should use in your application? 1 per connected client, 1 per application, or as many as needed. There are no limits on the amount of memory my app can use. So if you manage to see the question,
at least I have the answer.
Almost
so
up.
That's good. So yeah.
Okay. Well, 1 per application. Yeah, so we stress the fact that the session should be a singleton, and there is a single session over all of your application. So yeah, the answer is 1 per application, because now the application is your API, for example, and that will share a single session object. And this is not about how the client connects to your API, but this is about how your API speaks to the database, and that's where the singleton thing applies, even though your API might get requests from thousands of clients. Okay. So we might take a note on this bit being a bit maybe...
Isn't that the idea?
Yeah, maybe it uses a slippery language, maybe, who knows. So Dragonite is the fastest, but there are more questions coming, so let's move on.
What happened
Question
to Ryan?
number 2.
He didn't play the game?
And to get more points. Maybe he just came to say hi. Why should you prepare statements? So prepared statements are required, or you do that to speed up queries, or to make sure they are ready for the send stage when you run a query, or to properly cook them for guests. So why should you prepare statements? Time is almost up. Think about what we said. And yes, the answer is to speed up queries, because you can avoid sending the whole metadata every time, and you can avoid checking the schema and validating the types every time. That's great. Okay, so it looks like we did a good job with this one, and the fastest has been...
Is Dragonite supplanted?
Lola, but still Dragon, not yet, but the fastest is jumping and climbing the ladder. So, question number 3, let's see.
Yeah, 3 more to go.
Number 3, answer fast and try to give the right answer. Drivers. Do drivers route a query to the right node? Yes, if you tell them which node, or yes, automatically by themselves, or no, because each node has all data anyway, or there is no way to have this smart routing.
Oh, this is a tough question.
This is a general question on drivers. We mentioned that. And let's see. And the answer is yes, by themselves. So very great. When the connection is established, the drivers gain knowledge of the full cluster topology, and with that also the routing, the partitioning scheme comes, so they are able later to go to the right node for every query. Very good. And I think Adriana was the fastest and climbs at 5th position. Very good, but Dragonite is still leading. And this is now the last question.
All the marbles.
Let's see. Answer fast and answer correct. So one of the advantages of microservices is simpler architecture, or easier to test, or maybe decentralization, or less CPU needed, or maybe easier deployments. Let's see. Time's up. Okay, so actually there were 3 good answers, and it looks like most of you got a right one. yeah, decentralization is one of the big advantages, not the only one. Of course, that one in particular comes with also some needed changes in the company, in the way the company works. So less micromanaging probably usually. And Dragonite wins. Congratulations. Penguin Thomas also well placed, and well, congratulations to all of you. I hope you have learned enough today to get started and to further inspect what we started. So your application writing knowledge has just started. If you haven't yet, I suggest you go back to the other episodes of this bootcamp, because there is, of course, something more to learn about data modeling and also Cassandra general features. There's actually a lot there, but yeah, congratulations, because you finished the bootcamp. Congratulations. Now, let's move on. I remind you that you have possibility to further test your knowledge by doing an actual coding exercise, that is adding a new endpoint to this so far skeletal API. So the API you run, whatever the language, you can accommodate for a new endpoint corresponding to the query get all networks. And you can look at the data and dive back into what happens in the code, maybe go back to the data modeling part a bit, and you will find out how to do. And then you can submit the homework. We would be happy to grade it and award you your badge. So that would be the best way to reinforce your newly acquired knowledge, right? Okay, so that being said, I want to remind you that you are not alone in your journey. So we all get stuck sometimes, especially in writing code, right? So I remind you, happy to help you on our Discord, DataStax Developers, and this is the link. Maybe we can also have it on the YouTube chat, Discord, yes. And not only that, because we routinely patrol Stack Overflow and DBA Stack Exchange. If you tag your question with Cassandra, and even more, if you follow that tag, you will stay up to date with what's going on in the Cassandra space. So that's it. And this is our Discord community. So dtsxio/Discord, we are always there, happy to help. And that's not only about Cassandra, but more in general about, I would say, everything data and data architecture, data and programming related. We are there to discuss. Happy to. Okay, so there's a question how to open a second terminal in Gitpod. Maybe I can quickly show that. If this Gitpod, you see there is this plus button on my lower right. It's a new terminal. If I click this plus, there a new terminal. And that would be switch between them with this right-hand side switcher. Or you can also split terminal and have another terminal alongside the other. So you can play with these buttons on the lower right. Okay, so I hope that helped. Now, the important thing, if you want to know more on Cassandra, if you want to get part of the community, if you want to participate, or even just celebrate this very state-of-the-art piece of architecture, please join us for the Cassandra Summit. That's going to be great. After a few years, we are rebooting the in-person meetings, and this is a huge thing. So you're welcome to attend. And I remind you that there is a limited few days still to exploit the early bird offer. So don't hesitate. I think with that, we are done for today, just a little later than we should have. Sorry about that, and thank you for being with us so far. Please subscribe to our channel, because we are always there with new interesting content, and also because we are almost at 30,000, so maybe we are at just couple of subscriptions missing to hit 30K. So why don't we help us?
Yeah,
right,
just put us
just
put us
tiny
over the
small
hump, 30,000,
step.
and I think it'll be really cool to see everybody in person, especially the entire Cassandra community.
Yeah, indeed. So don't forget to, and I think with that we are really done. Thank you for staying with us. Hope that you learned a lot, and don't hesitate to get back to us for questions or whatever you feel like. And I think we can part ways now, and there might be a small surprise while just after this one. Who knows, right,
Yes,
Ralph?
thank you. Have a good
Thank you,
day, but you can't
everyone.
get rid of me just
See
yet. You
you.
will see that special coming up.
Yes.
I asked who else but ChatGPT to write me a rap song to promote my Cassandra and Cloud Native training for the Cassandra Summit. So here's the rap song. Listen up, you all. It's time to get schooled. In the world of Cassandra, you'll be no one's fool. Cloud Native, it's the way to go. Scalable and fast, you already know. Cassandra and Cloud Native is the future of tech. Get trained up and you'll be ahead of the rest. No more being left behind, it's time to shine. Cassandra and Cloud Native is the ultimate grind. Data management, it's a vital part. Cassandra's got you covered. It'll win your heart. With Cloud Native, you'll be able to soar. Leave your competition on the floor. So don't hesitate. Join the training crew. Cassandra and Cloud Native, it's what you need to do. Be the best in the game. It's time to claim your spot as a pro in the world of Cassandra and Cloud Native.
And as always, don't forget to click that subscribe button and ring that bell to get notifications.
Imagine a being gifted with powers from the goddess of Cassandra, who grew those powers until she could multiply at will, move with limitless speed, and unmask hidden knowledge. With those powers, she was able to fully understand the connectedness of the world. What she saw was a world in need of understanding. From that day forward, she sought to bestow her powers on all who came into contact with her, empowering them to achieve wondrous feats.